The whisper started before the organ finished its third attempt at the same hymn. 20 minutes. The murmur slid through the packed pews like a slow knife. Lady Caroline is 20 minutes late. At the altar of St. George's Church in Hanover Square, Gabriel Whitestone, 5th Duke of Claremont, stood perfectly still while 300 members of London's most powerful families watched his humiliation unfold. The chandeliers glittered overhead. Silk gowns rustled. Fans fluttered like restless birds. But the bride did not come. Gabriel kept his gaze forward, his hands clasped behind his back in the rigid posture expected of a duke. To anyone watching, he looked carved from stone. Inside, his heartbeat thundered. She will come. She must. Behind him, the archbishop shifted his weight. The organist faltered again, repeating the opening bars for the 4th time. Laughter flickered in the back rows before quickly dying under disapproving glances. Gabriel felt the weight of every eye. The polite curiosity, the pity, the quiet delight of those who would feast on scandal before supper. A hand touched his shoulder. Whitestone, Lord Hastings murmured beside him, voice low. A messenger has arrived. Gabriel turned. Hastings' expression told him everything. Cold dread slid down his spine. Moments later, the sacristy door closed behind them, muffling the swelling whispers from the church. A servant stood waiting with a sealed letter. Gabriel broke the wax with steady fingers. He read the message once. Then again, and again. The words never changed. My dear Gabriel, forgive me. I cannot marry you. I love another. For a moment the room seemed to tilt. The paper slipped from his hands. Hastings caught his arm before he fell. Good God, Hastings whispered. Gabriel said nothing, because in the space of 4 sentences his life had collapsed. Beyond the door, 300 members of the British aristocracy were already writing the scandal of the year. By nightfall, every drawing room in London would repeat the same sentence with gleeful disbelief. The Duke of Claremont was abandoned at the altar. Gabriel Whitestone had awakened that morning one of the most powerful men in England, 32 years old, owner of estates across 3 counties, respected in Parliament, feared in business, admired in society, untouchable, until a single letter reduced him to a spectacle. He did not return to the altar. He did not face the crowd. Instead, he walked out the back entrance of the church and disappeared into the London streets. 3 days later, the Duke of Claremont lay bleeding in a filthy alley in Southwark. He remembered very little about how he had arrived there, only fragments. Brandy, more brandy, dark streets, rough laughter, a blow to the head, boots in his ribs, hands tearing the signet ring from his finger. Then darkness. Cold rain fell softly now, soaking the stones beneath him. Gabriel's vision faded in and out. The world narrowed to pain. His skull throbbed with every heartbeat. His ribs burned when he tried to breathe. Somewhere nearby, a door creaked open. Bootsteps approached. He forced his eyes open. A woman stood above him. Not young enough to be called a girl. Not old enough to be called hardened. Perhaps 25. Her dark brown hair was tied loosely at the back of her neck, strands escaping to frame a face that would have been beautiful if not for the stern intelligence in her eyes. She wore a simple gray dress and a work apron stained with flour and soot. No jewels, no lace, no sign she belonged anywhere near a duke. She looked down at him as if he were simply another broken thing left on the street. Still alive. That's inconvenient, she muttered. Gabriel tried to speak. Blood filled his mouth. The woman crouched beside him. Her hands were warm and surprisingly strong as she pressed 2 fingers to his throat. Pulse, she said quietly, barely. She studied his torn coat, the ruined cashmere, the expensive boots, the face beneath the blood. Recognition flickered briefly in her eyes. Not recognition of him, recognition of the type. A nobleman, she murmured. Her mouth tightened. Figures. For a long moment she said nothing. Rain soaked through her skirts. Gabriel drifted in and out of consciousness. Finally she sighed. Well, she said, sliding one arm beneath his shoulders. I suppose even dukes deserve not to die in the gutter. He tried to focus. Who? Nora Hale, she replied briskly. With remarkable strength she pulled him upright. Owner of the tavern you're about to bleed all over. Gabriel barely felt himself being dragged across the muddy street. The last thing he heard before darkness swallowed him again was her voice, firm and unyielding. If you die in my bed, your grace, she muttered under her breath, I swear I'll throw you back into the alley myself. Hours later, Gabriel Whitestone opened his eyes. Pain greeted him first, then the low wooden ceiling, a flickering candle, the smell of cheap soap and smoke. He tried to sit up. Agony shot through his ribs. The door opened. Nora stepped inside carrying a basin of water. She paused when she saw his eyes open. For a moment they simply stared at each other. Then she said calmly, "You're awake." Gabriel swallowed. "Where am I?" Nora wrung a cloth in the basin. "Somewhere safe." She stepped closer, "And far more than you deserve." The cloth pressed against his temple. Gabriel hissed. She cleaned the blood away with steady, practical hands. No reverence, no fear, no curiosity, just quiet competence. After a moment she asked, "What were you running from?" Gabriel hesitated. "The altar, the whispers, the humiliation." "I was attacked," he said hoarsely. Nora studied him, long enough that Gabriel felt strangely exposed beneath her gaze. Finally she said, "That's not what I asked." Silence stretched between them. Then Nora set the cloth aside and met his eyes, and in a voice completely devoid of sympathy, she said the words that would change the course of his life. "You weren't running from thieves." She folded her arms. "You were running from yourself." Gabriel Whitestone, Duke of Claremont, had never in his life been spoken to that way, and for the first time since the altar, he had no idea how to answer. Morning arrived slowly in the narrow house. Gabriel woke to unfamiliar sounds, not the quiet efficiency of servants moving through polished corridors, nor the distant clatter of carriage wheels in Mayfair. Here the house breathed differently. Footsteps creaked across wooden floors. A child laughed somewhere below. A kettle whistled in a kitchen that smelled faintly of bread and smoke. Gabriel lay still on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling beams above him. The events of the previous days returned in brutal fragments. The altar, the letter, the alley, and the woman who had dragged him out of it like a stubborn ghost refusing to die. Nora Hale. The name sat strangely in his mind. He tried to sit up. Pain tore through his ribs again. "Still alive, I see." Her voice came from the doorway. Nora entered, carrying a bowl and a cloth. The morning light behind her framed her silhouette, simple and unadorned. She looked exactly as she had the night before. Practical, unimpressed, entirely unimpressed by the fact that the broken man on her bed was one of the most powerful dukes in England. Gabriel forced himself upright with difficulty. "I believe so," he said. Nora set the bowl on the table. "Good," she replied evenly. "Because I refuse to explain to the magistrate why a dead aristocrat is rotting in my spare room." Gabriel almost laughed. The sound startled him. He could not remember the last time someone had spoken to him without ceremony. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Nora dipped the cloth in water. "Don't mistake practicality for kindness." She stepped closer and began cleaning the dried blood from his temple. Her movements were firm but careful. "What happened to you?" she asked. Gabriel hesitated. The truth tasted bitter. "I was robbed." Nora raised an eyebrow. "You were drunk," she corrected. Gabriel said nothing. "Men like you," she continued calmly, "don't wander through Southwark alleys at midnight unless something has gone very wrong." Her dark eyes lifted to meet his. "So I'll ask again." She wrung out the cloth. "What were you running from?" Gabriel looked away. How does one explain humiliation so complete it stripped away identity? "I lost control," he said finally. Nora studied him for a long moment. The silence was uncomfortable. Then she stepped back. "You'll stay here 2 days," she said. "Until you can stand without falling over." She crossed her arms. "But there are rules." Gabriel blinked. "Rules?" "Yes." She counted them on her fingers. "You don't wander around the house. You don't question the women who live here. And you don't bring trouble to my door." Her voice hardened slightly. "Because the people in this house have already had enough of it." Gabriel frowned. "Women?" Nora nodded toward the hallway. "Single mothers. Former servants. Girls thrown out when their employers decided their reputation mattered more than their responsibility." Her gaze sharpened. "Women discarded by men who never paid the price for their mistakes." The words landed heavily. Gabriel felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest. "How many?" he asked quietly. 5 women, Nora said. 3 children. She paused. "And 1 wounded nobleman who doesn't belong here." The statement was not cruel. It was simply fact. Before Gabriel could respond, footsteps approached the room. An older woman appeared in the doorway carrying folded linen. Her silver hair was pinned neatly back, and her sharp eyes studied Gabriel with experienced curiosity. "So," she said, "this is the one you dragged in?" Nora sighed. "Mary, this is—" Gabriel spoke first. "Gabriel." Just Gabriel. The lie hovered quietly between them. Mary raised an eyebrow. "Gabriel," she repeated thoughtfully. "Well, Gabriel." She placed the linen on a chair. "You look less dead today." "Encouraging," Gabriel replied dryly. Mary smiled faintly. Nora ignored both of them. Mary helps run the house, she said. Which means she'll be the one throwing you out if you break anything. Mary folded her arms. I always enjoy that part. Gabriel found himself studying them. Two women running a house in the poorest district of London, sheltering strangers, protecting children, doing the work his own society pretended did not exist. Why, he asked suddenly. Nora paused. Why what? Why do you do this? She stared at him as if the question itself were foolish. Because someone must. Gabriel held her gaze. That isn't the real answer. For a brief moment, something flickered across Nora's expression. Pain, anger, memory. A nobleman once promised me a future, she said quietly. He disappeared when that future became inconvenient. The room went still. Nora turned toward the door before either man could speak. Rest, she said. You'll need your strength. She paused in the doorway. And Gabriel? Yes. Her eyes met his. You may be a gentleman in your world. Her voice cooled. But in this house, you are nothing special. Then she walked away, leaving Gabriel Whitestone staring at the doorway and realizing something deeply unsettling. For the first time in his life, someone had looked directly at him and refused to bow. Gabriel spent the next day confined to the small upstairs room. Not because Nora forced him, because his body refused anything else. Every attempt to stand ended the same way, his ribs burning, his head spinning, the humiliating realization that even walking across the floor required effort. So he lay still and listened. It was impossible not to. The thin walls carried every sound of the house. Women speaking softly in the kitchen, the scrape of chairs, the cry of a baby, a small boy laughing somewhere in the hallway. Gabriel had lived his entire life surrounded by people. Servants, advisors, guests. But the sounds here were different, real, unpolished, untamed by etiquette. Late in the afternoon, the door creaked open. This time it was not Nora. Mary entered carrying a tray with soup and bread. You should eat, she said, setting it down beside the bed. Gabriel sat up slowly. The soup smelled simple, chicken broth, carrots, potatoes, but his stomach tightened with hunger. He had not eaten properly since before the wedding day. Before the letter, before everything collapsed. Mary took the only chair in the room and watched him eat. You're a nobleman, she said calmly. Gabriel froze with the spoon halfway to his mouth. He looked at her. I never said that. Mary smiled faintly. You didn't need to. She nodded toward his hands. Too clean. Then toward his speech. Too careful. And finally toward his posture. Too proud. Gabriel lowered the spoon slowly. Does Nora know? Mary shrugged. She suspects. That was worse. Gabriel returned to his soup, suddenly aware of how fragile his disguise truly was. Mary stood after a moment. When you finish, leave the tray here. She moved toward the door. But before leaving, she added quietly, You're the first noble Nora has ever brought into this house. Gabriel frowned.
Why?
Mary paused. Because she hates your kind. Then she left. The door remained slightly open, and for the first time Gabriel could see into the hallway. A narrow corridor, peeling wallpaper, bare wooden floorboards, nothing like the polished estates he owned. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. A small boy appeared, messy brown hair, patched trousers, bare feet. He nearly collided with Gabriel standing in the doorway. They stared at each other. The boy tilted his head. You're the injured man, he said. I believe so. I'm Thomas. Gabriel crouched slowly, wincing. Gabriel. Thomas looked him over with the brutal honesty only children possess. You don't look like the men here. That obvious? The boy nodded. You stand funny. Gabriel almost smiled. Before he could reply, Anne appeared behind the boy. Thomas, she said quickly. Her eyes flicked nervously to Gabriel. Come downstairs. The boy hesitated. Then he leaned closer to Gabriel and whispered conspiratorially, My mother says nobles are dangerous. The word struck harder than expected. Gabriel swallowed. Your mother might be right. Thomas considered this. Then he shrugged. You fixed the back door earlier, he said. That was helpful. The boy extended a small hand. So I think you can stay. Gabriel shook it solemnly. Thank you. Thomas nodded with great importance and ran downstairs. Gabriel remained kneeling there long after the boy vanished. The words echoed inside him. Nobles are dangerous. How many times had he heard similar accusations dismissed in Parliament? How often had he defended the system that allowed men to ruin lives and walk away untouched? Downstairs he heard Nora's voice. Firm, calm, protective. For the first time since the scandal at the altar, Gabriel Whitestone felt something worse than humiliation. He felt shame, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if the world he had spent 32 years defending was the very thing that needed to be changed. Nora Hale woke before dawn. She always did. The house was quiet at that hour. Those rare moments before the children stirred, before the women began their day, before the tavern below filled with the noise of men seeking cheap ale and warmer company. Nora valued that silence. It was the only time the past could not find her. She lit the kitchen stove and set a kettle over the flame. The small room smelled of wood smoke and yesterday's bread. Her hands moved automatically, cutting bread, checking supplies, counting the coins in the small wooden box she kept hidden beneath the counter. Every coin mattered. Every loaf mattered, because every woman upstairs depended on her, and weakness was not a luxury she could afford. You didn't sleep. Mary's voice came from the doorway. Nora didn't look up. I slept. Mary raised a brow. You were pacing the floor until nearly 2. Nora sighed and poured tea into 2 chipped cups. Mary sat across from her at the table. They drank in silence for a moment. Finally, Mary asked the question Nora had been avoiding. What are you going to do about him? Nora stiffened. I'm not doing anything. You brought him here. I brought him inside so he wouldn't die in the street. Mary leaned forward. He's different. Nora laughed softly. They always are. The bitterness in her voice filled the kitchen. Mary did not argue. She simply waited. Nora pressed her hands around the warm cup. For a long moment she stared into the steam. Then she spoke quietly. His hands gave him away. Mary nodded. And his voice. And his arrogance, Nora added dryly. But he's trying, Mary said gently. Nora shook her head. That's how it starts. Her eyes darkened. He says the right things. He pretends to listen. He makes you believe the rules of the world might bend just for you. Mary knew where this was going. She had heard the story before, but Nora rarely allowed herself to say it aloud. James Hartwell, Mary said softly. Nora closed her eyes. 6 years. 6 years, and the name still felt like a knife sliding between her ribs. He was charming, Nora said quietly. He used to bring flowers to the shop where I worked. Mary said nothing. Nora's voice grew distant. He said titles meant nothing to him. He said love was stronger than society. Her mouth twisted bitterly. I believed him. Mary reached across the table, but Nora pulled her hands away. I was 19, she continued. Too young to understand that men like him don't break rules. They simply walk away from them. The kitchen fell silent except for the kettle beginning to whistle. Nora stood quickly and removed it from the stove. When I told him I was pregnant, she said flatly, he disappeared. Mary lowered her gaze. Nora's voice hardened. I went to his father's house. The Viscount answered the door. She laughed softly. Didn't even invite me inside. Nora stared at the steam rising from the kettle. He told me his son was engaged to a duke's daughter. Mary knew the rest, but Nora said it anyway. I lost the baby 2 weeks later. The words hung in the air like a ghost. For a long time, neither woman spoke. Finally, Mary said quietly, Gabriel isn't James. Nora's jaw tightened. They're all James. Mary sighed. Maybe, she said. But maybe this one is different. Nora pushed back her chair. I don't care if he's a king or a chimney sweep. He stays until he can walk. Then he leaves. She grabbed a loaf of bread and headed for the stairs. But as she climbed toward Gabriel's room, Nora felt something dangerous stirring beneath her armor. Because for the first time since James Hartwell, a man had looked at her not with charm, not with pity, but with something far more unsettling. Respect? And Nora Hale did not know what to do with it. Gabriel did not sleep that night. He lay on the narrow bed staring at the dim ceiling, Nora's words circling endlessly in his mind. You ruin lives and walk away untouched. Once he would have dismissed such accusations as bitterness. Now, in the quiet of her house, surrounded by the lives that proved her right, the words felt like judgment. Gabriel closed his eyes. He thought of the countless times he had heard stories like Anne's, spoken quietly at dinner tables or passed along in political debates. Servants dismissed. Scandals quietly buried. Children never acknowledged. He had never questioned it. It had simply been the way things were. And that realization now sat in his chest like a stone. By morning, Gabriel understood one thing clearly. Thinking about change was not the same as doing something. He pushed himself out of bed. Pain shot through his ribs. He ignored it. When he opened the door, the smell of cooking drifted up from the kitchen below. Voices, laughter, a baby crying softly. The life of the house continued without him. Gabriel walked downstairs slowly, gripping the railing. The kitchen fell silent when he appeared. 3 women sat at the table, Anne with her son Thomas beside her, another young woman rocking a baby in her arms. Mary stood near the stove stirring a pot. Every pair of eyes turned toward him, not hostile, not welcoming, simply cautious. "Good morning," Gabriel said. No one answered. Mary studied him for a moment. "You should be resting." "I've rested enough." Gabriel hesitated, then said the most unfamiliar sentence of his life. "Is there anything I can help with?" Anne frowned. "With what?" Gabriel opened his mouth, closed it again. The truth was humiliating. He did not know how to cook, did not know how to clean, had never mended a roof or carried firewood. For 32 years he had lived surrounded by servants who handled every practical task of existence. "I can learn," he said quietly. Mary watched him for a long moment. Then she pointed toward the back door. "The hinge on that door has been loose for a month." She lifted one brow. "If you want to help, fix it." Gabriel nodded. "I will." Outside, the small shed contained a scattering of tools. Hammers, bent nails, a rusted hinge. Gabriel knelt beside the sagging door and examined the damage. It looked simple enough. He picked up the hammer. The first nail bent sideways. The second smashed his thumb. Pain exploded through his hand. Gabriel cursed under his breath. Behind him, a small voice said, "That's not how you do it." Gabriel turned. Thomas stood watching him with intense interest. "Oh? You're hitting it wrong." The boy walked closer and pointed. "Like this." Gabriel adjusted his grip. "Tried again." The nail slid into the wood properly this time. Thomas nodded approvingly. "Better." They worked together for several minutes. When the door finally closed smoothly, Gabriel stepped back, breathing hard. Thomas pushed it open and shut twice. "It works." "Excellent," Gabriel said. The boy studied him carefully, then asked the question children never hesitate to ask. "Are you a nobleman?" Gabriel froze. The lie rose automatically, but something stopped him. "Yes," he said quietly. Thomas nodded as if confirming a theory. "My mother says nobles hurt people." The bluntness struck deeper than Nora's anger. Gabriel crouched so they were eye level. "Your mother is often right," he said. Thomas tilted his head. "Are you going to hurt us?" The question hung between them. Gabriel swallowed. "I hope not." Thomas considered this for a long moment, then shrugged. "If you do," he said seriously, clenching his small fist, "I'll punch you." Despite everything, Gabriel laughed. "That seems fair." The boy ran back inside. Gabriel remained kneeling in the dirt, hammer still in his hand. For the first time in his life, he had fixed something with his own hands, and somehow, that small act felt more meaningful than every speech he had ever given in Parliament. The posture of someone born into power, Lord Hastings, Gabriel's godfather. Hastings' eyes scanned the tavern. They landed on Gabriel. For a moment he simply stared. Then the color drained from his face. "Whitestone," he breathed. The name fell into the room like thunder. Nora turned slowly. Her gaze moved from Hastings to Gabriel. "Whitestone?" she repeated. Hastings crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Where the devil have you been?" he demanded. "The entire city is searching for you." His voice rose with disbelief. "You vanished after the wedding, and now I find you in a Southwark tavern?" Nora's expression hardened. She looked directly at Gabriel. "Wedding?" Hastings blinked. "You didn't tell them?" Gabriel closed his eyes. Too late. Hastings turned toward Nora. "This man is Gabriel Whitestone." He gestured incredulously. "The Duke of Claremont." Silence swallowed the tavern. The women froze. Anne's hand tightened on Thomas's shoulder. Nora stared at Gabriel as if seeing him for the first time. Not confusion, not anger. Something worse. Betrayal. "You're a duke," she said quietly. Gabriel took a step toward her. "Nora! You told me your name was Gabriel?" "That is my name." Her laugh was sharp. "Just Gabriel, you said." He swallowed. "I didn't lie." "You hid the truth?" Her voice trembled now. "Do you understand what you've done?" Gabriel reached for words that refused to come. Nora stepped back. "If anyone discovers the Duke of Claremont has been living in a house full of abandoned women..." Her voice broke. "They won't ruin you. They'll ruin us." Gabriel felt the weight of her words like a blow to the chest. He had not thought of that. Of course he hadn't. Nora shook her head slowly. "You see? That's the problem with men like you." She pointed toward the door. "Leave." Gabriel stared at her. "Nora, please, leave." Her voice was empty now. Lord Hastings stepped forward and took Gabriel's arm. "Come, Whitestone." Gabriel looked back one last time. Nora had already turned away, and for the first time since the day he had been left at the altar, Gabriel Whitestone felt something far worse than humiliation. He felt loss. 3 months passed. 3 months in which Gabriel Whitestone did not return to Southwark. Not because he had forgotten Nora, but because he finally understood something she had tried to tell him from the beginning. Words meant nothing. Proof meant everything. The Duke of Claremont shocked London. At first, society believed his strange behavior was simply the aftermath of the scandal at the altar. But Gabriel's actions did not fade. They intensified. He dismissed 2 estate overseers accused of underpaying workers. He ordered the repair of every tenant cottage on Claremont land before winter. He doubled wages in the mills his family owned. The newspapers mocked him. Some called him naive, others called him dangerous. But Gabriel continued, because every report he read reminded him of Nora's voice. You never think about the price we pay. Now he thought about nothing else. One cold November morning, Gabriel stood inside a newly restored building in Southwark. 3 floors, bright windows, clean beds, a large kitchen where women could cook together, children's rooms filled with books and toys. Above the entrance hung a simple wooden sign, or Claremont Haven, a refuge for women with nowhere else to go. Mary stood beside him holding the keys. She looked suspicious. Why me? She asked. Because Nora trusts you, Gabriel replied. And I trust anything that comes from her. Mary narrowed her eyes. You love that girl, don't you? Gabriel didn't hesitate. Yes. Mary studied him a long moment. Then she pressed the keys into her pocket. If you ever hurt her, she said calmly, I'll break your nose. Gabriel smiled faintly. That seems fair. Nora heard about the Haven 2 weeks later. At first she refused to believe it, but the stories kept coming. A duke reforming factories, a duke funding shelters, a duke walking through the poorest districts of London without guards. Finally Mary dragged her to see the place. Nora stood in the doorway of the building Gabriel had built. She said nothing. Children were laughing upstairs. Women were sewing near the windows. Warmth filled the rooms. Hope lived here. And for the first time in her life, Nora saw what it looked like when power was used to protect instead of destroy. A voice behind her said quietly, I hoped you would come. Nora turned. Gabriel stood there. He looked different, thinner, tired, but steadier. She crossed her arms instinctively. You built this? Yes.
Why?
Gabriel met her gaze. Because you showed me the world I had never bothered to see. Nora studied him carefully. And you expect forgiveness? No. His voice was calm. I expect nothing. He stepped closer. I only hoped you might see that I'm trying to become someone better than the man you met in that alley. Nora was silent for a long time. Finally she said softly, You hurt me. I know. You scared me. I know. Her voice softened. But this... She looked around the Haven. This matters. Gabriel nodded. It's only a beginning. Nora inhaled slowly. Then she said the words Gabriel had been waiting 3 months to hear. I don't trust you yet. I understand. But... A faint smile touched her lips. I might be willing to see who you become. Relief flashed through Gabriel's eyes. He did not reach for her, did not rush the moment. Instead he said quietly, Then let me start with the truth. Nora raised an eyebrow. What truth? He smiled softly. My name is Gabriel. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand. Just Gabriel, she said. He took it gently, and in that quiet room, far from ballrooms and titles, the Duke of Claremont began the most important work of his life, winning the heart of the only woman who had ever refused to bow to him.